Unaware, his wife was the secret owner of the trillion-dollar tech company. His mistress needed to save her brand. He served her divorce papers at a banquet to marry his mistress after his sister shredded her dress. What she did when 10 Maybachs and a military escort arrived to fetch her left him bankrupt and groveling. Unaware his wife was the secret owner of the trillion-dollar tech company his mistress needed to save her brand, David Morrison handed Evelyn the divorce papers at the charity banquet while 300 guests watched in stunned silence. The champagne glass trembled in Evelyn's hand, not from shock, but from the memory of signing Technova Industries Incorporation papers in that same ballroom 12 years ago, back when David was still a struggling marketing consultant who dismissed her silly tech hobby. His mistress, Natasha Green, stood beside him in a dress that cost more than most people's cars, but her luxury fashion brand was hemorrhaging money, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy despite the glamorous facade. David's sister, Margaret, had shredded Evelyn's dress in the powder room 30 minutes earlier, laughing about how the gold digger would finally be gone, unaware that the woman she humiliated had just declined a meeting with 3 foreign presidents that same morning. The room fell silent as the sounds of multiple engines thundered outside, 10 Maybach limousines rolling up to the venue's entrance, followed by a full military escort with flashing lights that reflected off the crystal chandeliers. Evelyn's phone buzzed, her CFO confirming that Technova's board had unanimously approved her request to pull all partnerships, the same partnerships that represented 90% of Natasha's brand's survival strategy. What none of them knew was that Evelyn had spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment, moving assets, restructuring corporations, and building an empire that would make David's betrayal the most expensive mistake of his life. Would David recognize his wife before the military commander addressed her as Madam Chairwoman? Could Natasha's brand survive when she realized the woman she helped humiliate controlled her company's lifeline? What would David's face reveal when the bankruptcy notices arrived at his office the following morning, signed by the wife he thought was just a housewife? Dear viewers, this powerful story teaches the critical lessons of recognizing hidden value in those closest to you and understanding that assumptions about others can destroy your future. You'll benefit from seeing how quiet strength triumphs over arrogance, why underestimating your partner is dangerous, and how karma operates through the consequences of our choices. While the narrative demonstrates that true power doesn't announce itself, but rather operates in silence until the decisive moment. Please drop in the comments what lessons you learned and what you would have done differently if you were in David's position. Subscribe for more compelling, entertaining, and educational stories that deliver life-changing wisdom. The powder room of the Grandview Hotel sparkled with the kind of opulence that made ordinary people feel insignificant. But Evelyn Morrison had stopped feeling intimidated by luxury the day her company's valuation hit its first $100 billion. Margaret Morrison blocked the doorway, scissors gleaming in her manicured hand, her smile carrying the cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. And the security camera in the corner, disguised as a decorative light fixture, captured every angle as Margaret advanced. But Evelyn didn't move, didn't protest, because she'd learned years ago that sometimes the best strategy was allowing your enemies to destroy themselves on camera. You really thought you belonged here, didn't you? Margaret's voice dripped with venom as the first cut sliced through the navy fabric of Evelyn's dress, the sound sharp in the confined space. My brother is finally getting rid of you, and honestly, it's about time he stopped carrying dead weight. The fabric tore beautifully under Margaret's scissors, each snip documented in high-definition video that Evelyn's legal team would use in the defamation lawsuit already drafted and waiting in her attorney's office. Evelyn's mind flashed back to the board meeting that morning, where she'd sat at the head of a table surrounded by former presidents, tech moguls, and defense ministers discussing contracts that would reshape global infrastructure. The contrast was almost amusing. 6 hours ago, she'd been deciding which countries would receive her company's revolutionary technology, but now she stood silent while her sister-in-law destroyed a dress that cost less than the legal fees she'd spent that week. David deserves someone sophisticated, Margaret continued, her scissors working methodically through the designer fabric. Someone like Natasha, who actually understands business and culture, not some little housewife who got lucky marrying up. The irony was suffocating, but Evelyn maintained her composure, in her face showing just enough distress to make the video compelling without appearing weak. Margaret didn't know that marrying up had meant David gaining access to a lifestyle funded entirely by Evelyn's corporate dividends, that the Morrison family's recent financial comfort came from investments Evelyn had quietly arranged, or that the sophisticated Natasha was currently drowning in debt so severe that her accountants were preparing bankruptcy filings. The final strips of fabric fell to the marble floor, leaving Evelyn in her slip. But Margaret's triumph would be short-lived. Evelyn's phone buzzed in her clutch. A message from her head of security confirming that Margaret's assault had been recorded from 3 different angles, that police reports could be filed within the hour if Evelyn authorized it, and that the hotel's management was already reviewing the footage with concern. There, Margaret stepped back, admiring her handiwork with satisfaction that radiated from her perfectly made-up face. Now you look like what you really are, nothing. When David announces your divorce tonight, everyone will see you for the pathetic charity case you've always been. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice steady despite the borrowed coat she pulled from her bag. Always prepared, always 3 steps ahead. Margaret, do you ever wonder why I never fought back? Why I never argued with your insults or defended myself against your accusations? Margaret's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her features, but her arrogance quickly recovered. Because you know I'm right. Because you know you don't belong in our family. No, Evelyn said quietly, fastening the coat's buttons with deliberate precision. Because I learned a long time ago that foolish people destroy themselves if you simply give them enough rope and enough time. The words hung in the air as Evelyn walked past Margaret toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how this evening would end. Margaret's laughter followed her into the hallway, but Evelyn's mind was already calculating the next moves. The military escort that would arrive in 47 minutes, the corporate announcements that would go live at midnight, and the legal documents that would systematically dismantle everything David and Margaret thought they'd built. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as Evelyn re-entered, her borrowed coat hiding the destruction beneath, but her posture remained impeccable. David stood near the podium with Natasha, both of them radiating the false confidence of people who believed they controlled the narrative. Natasha's hand rested possessively on David's arm, her designer dress and perfect hair representing a brand that was currently 48 hours from complete financial collapse. Evelyn's CFO had sent the final confirmation that morning. Technova Industries controlled the technology partnerships, the manufacturing contracts, and the distribution agreements that kept green fashion brands afloat. Natasha had been chasing meetings with Technova's reclusive CEO for 9 months, never suspecting that the woman stood 20 feet away, watching her cling to a man whose betrayal would cost them both everything they'd schemed to achieve. David Morrison's hand felt steady as he gripped the microphone, his confidence built on years of self-deception and the intoxicating validation of a beautiful woman who pretended to worship him. The ballroom's 300 guests represented the city's elite: tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, entertainment moguls, and political figures who'd paid $10,000 per seat to attend the annual Innovation Gala. Natasha stood beside him in her crimson gown, her smile practiced to perfection, but her eyes kept darting toward the entrance, silently praying for a miracle that would never come. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your attention for a personal announcement. David's voice carried across the room with the kind of theatrical confidence that made Evelyn's stomach turn. When the memory flashed through her mind. 14 years ago, David stammering through his wedding vows, promising to honor and cherish her through every success and failure, back when his sincerity had seemed genuine rather than conditional. Evelyn stood near the bar, her borrowed coat drawing curious glances, but her face remained serene as she watched her husband prepare to publicly destroy their marriage. Her phone vibrated continuously with encrypted messages. Her security team was 8 minutes away. Her legal department had filed the preliminary divorce counterclaims with evidence of adultery, and her corporate communications director was prepared to release a statement that would reshape the entire evening's narrative. Marriage is about partnership. What about finding someone who matches your ambition and understands your vision? David continued, his prepared speech rolling off his tongue while Natasha gazed at him with manufactured adoration. Sometimes we make choices in our youth that we outgrow, commitments to people who can't evolve with us as we reach new heights. The condescension in his voice was palpable, but what David didn't know was that his new heights consisted of a marketing firm generating $3 million annually, respectable but microscopic compared to Technova's quarterly revenue of $47 billion. Evelyn had reviewed his company's financials just last week, noting with clinical detachment that 72% of his client base came through referrals she'd quietly arranged, or that his largest contracts existed because her corporate network had opened doors he couldn't access alone. Evelyn Morrison, my wife of 12 years, has been a companion through many seasons. David's eyes found her across the room, his expression mixing pity with triumph. But tonight, I'm choosing authenticity over obligation. I'm choosing a partner who shares my drive, my sophistication, my understanding of what it takes to succeed in today's competitive landscape. Gasps rippled through the crowd as David produced the divorce papers, holding them up like a trophy while Natasha's hand found his, their united front projecting strength that would crumble within the hour. Several guests pulled out their phones, capturing the moment for social media, creating digital evidence that Evelyn's PR team would weaponize before sunrise. Margaret appeared beside Natasha, her satisfaction radiating like toxic perfume, whispering something that made both women laugh while David approached Evelyn with the papers extended. The walk across the ballroom felt choreographed, dramatic, designed for maximum humiliation, but David had forgotten that Evelyn had founded her empire on strategic thinking rather than theatrical gestures. I think you'll find the terms generous, David said quietly as he reached her, his voice carrying false kindness that made her skin crawl. The house, a reasonable settlement, enough to live comfortably if you're careful with spending. Natasha and I have already arranged. The distinctive sound of high-performance engines cut through his words like a blade through silk. 10 Maybach limousines, each worth $600,000, rolled up to the hotel's entrance in perfect military formation, their diplomatic flags illuminated by the streetlights. The ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows provided a clear view as uniformed military personnel emerged from escort vehicles, establishing a security perimeter that blocked traffic in all directions. Conversation died instantly as 300 heads turned toward the spectacle outside. Natasha's face drained of color, her hand gripping David's arm with sudden desperation, because somewhere in her desperate research about Technova Industries, she'd seen photos of similar security details accompanying the company's CEO to international summits. David's confusion was almost comical as he followed the crowd's collective gaze, his brain struggling to process why military assets were deploying outside his divorce announcement. Evelyn's phone displayed the message she'd been anticipating. Madam Chairwoman, extraction team in position. Secretary of Defense sends his regards and confirms your safety is his administration's priority. All hostile business entities flagged per your authorization. The ballroom doors opened with ceremonial precision as a uniformed commander entered, his chest decorated with medals that indicated service at the highest levels of military leadership. His eyes scanned the room with professional efficiency before landing on Evelyn, and his entire demeanor shifted into formal deference that made every person in the ballroom understand that something extraordinary was happening. Madam Chairwoman Chen, the commander's voice carried military crispness that silenced even the whispers. Your security detail has arrived. No, we have confirmed threats against your person, and I'm authorized to provide full military escort under national security protocols. The divorce papers slipped from David's hands, fluttering to the floor like his understanding of reality. Natasha's gasp was audible across the silent room, her mind making connections that her desperation had prevented her from seeing before. Margaret's face transformed from triumph to confusion to dawning horror as the implications crashed through her arrogance like a wrecking ball through paper. Evelyn stood perfectly still, letting the moment breathe, letting 300 witnesses absorb the scene before responding. Thank you, Commander Patterson. Please give me 5 minutes to address my husband's announcement. The silence in the ballroom carried the weight of 300 people simultaneously realizing they'd witnessed something far more significant than a simple divorce announcement. David's face cycled through emotions faster than his brain could process them, confusion melting into disbelief. Disbelief hardening into denial. Denial cracking under the pressure of impossible mathematics that his mind refused to calculate. Natasha's carefully constructed composure shattered like expensive crystal, her breathing shallow as she stared at Evelyn with recognition that came 9 months too late. Chairwoman Chen? David's voice cracked on the title, his marketing-trained brain trying desperately to compartmentalize information that destroyed every assumption he'd built his life upon. There must be some mistake. Evelyn, what is he talking about? Why would military personnel? Chairwoman Evelyn Chen of Technova Industries, Commander Patterson clarified, his tone carrying the patience of someone accustomed to explaining classified operations to civilians who lacked proper security clearance. Ma'am, we should really move you to a secure location. The threats we've intercepted suggest… Commander, I appreciate your concern, but I need a moment. Evelyn interrupted gently, her voice carrying an authority that made the decorated military officer step back immediately. She turned to David, studying the man she'd married 14 years ago, searching for remnants of the person who'd once promised to support her dreams before he'd systematically dismissed every ambition she'd shared. The flashback hit her with unexpected force. Their tiny apartment in Brooklyn, David working 60-hour weeks at a failing startup while she coded in their bedroom, building the algorithms that would eventually revolutionize military defense systems. She'd shown him her prototype, eyes bright with excitement, explaining how her artificial intelligence could predict security threats with 97% accuracy. His response echoed through her memory. That's nice, honey, but maybe focus on something more realistic? Tech is a tough field for women. Why don't you look into teaching or maybe event planning? That night, she'd cried silently in their bathroom, then dried her tears and incorporated Technova Industries under her maiden name, building her empire in the shadows, while David dismissed her potential with every patronizing smile. Every government contract she'd secured, on every breakthrough her team achieved, every billion added to her company's valuation. She'd accomplished it all while her husband introduced her at parties as my wife who likes computers. David? Evelyn's voice cut through the ballroom's stunned silence with surgical precision. Do you remember 12 years ago when you needed $70,000 to save your first real marketing client? When your business partner embezzled your startup capital and you were facing bankruptcy? David's face paled, his mind racing back to that desperate period when his career hung by a thread. But his expression showed he'd never questioned where his salvation had come from. My uncle loaned me that money. He believed in me when… Your uncle died 3 years before that crisis, Evelyn interrupted, her tone neither cruel nor kind, simply factual. I wired the money from Technova's accounts, routed through a shell corporation because despite everything, I still believed in supporting my husband's dreams even when he'd spent years crushing mine. Natasha's sharp intake of breath drew attention as the implications detonated in her calculating mind. Her brand survival depended on partnerships with Technova Industries, the technology integrations for her smart fashion line, the manufacturing contracts that kept her production costs viable, the distribution agreements that gave green fashion brands access to international markets. 9 months of desperate emails, declined meeting requests, and ignored proposals suddenly made horrifying sense. You're the CEO? Natasha's voice trembled with the realization that she'd helped a man divorce the only person who could save her company from the bankruptcy her accountants had been hiding from investors. The Technova CEO that my team has been trying to schedule with for 9 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, Evelyn confirmed, pulling her phone from her coat pocket and scrolling through emails with practiced efficiency. Your first request came through our partnership development department last July. Your brand wanted access to our smart fabric technology, our manufacturing networks in Southeast Asia, and our distribution partnerships across Europe and North America. Margaret stumbled backward, her hand gripping a nearby table for support, as the woman she'd assaulted 30 minutes earlier transformed before her eyes. Seeing the security footage of her scissor attack suddenly felt like evidence in a criminal case rather than a moment of justified family protection. And her mind raced through every insult she'd hurled at Evelyn over the years, every dismissive comment, every cruel joke made at family dinners. The Morrison family investments that you've been bragging about, Margaret, Evelyn continued, her gaze shifting to her sister-in-law with clinical detachment. The real estate portfolio, the tech stocks, the mutual funds that kept your lifestyle comfortable? I structured 93% of those investments through my financial advisors. Your brother's firm has exactly 4 legitimate clients. The other 27 were referred through my corporate network because I believed in protecting family. David's legs seemed to give out as he sank into a nearby chair, his hands trembling as reality restructured itself around facts he could no longer deny. The military presence, the diplomatic vehicles, the commander's deference, puzzle pieces assembling into a picture that destroyed everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and his own accomplishments. Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from her CFO. All contracts terminated. Green fashion brands flagged for partnership suspension. Morrison Marketing Associates referred to hostile acquisitions review, or legal estimates both entities facing bankruptcy within 72 hours without Technova infrastructure support. "I spent 6 months preparing for this moment," Evelyn said quietly, her words carrying across the silent ballroom, with the finality of a judge's verdict. Moving assets into protected trusts, restructuring corporate partnerships, ensuring that when this day came, the consequences would be proportional to the betrayal. Commander Patterson's radio crackled with urgent communication, his expression tightening as he processed information through his earpiece. "Ma'am, we really need to move you now. The situation has escalated." "One more minute, Commander," Evelyn requested, then turned back to David with eyes that held no anger, no vindictiveness, just the cold clarity of someone who'd finally stopped carrying dead weight. "See, you wanted a divorce, David. You'll get one. But you'll get it on my terms, through my attorneys, with full forensic accounting of every dollar you've spent from accounts you thought were yours but were actually funded by my corporate distributions." The 72 hours following the banquet moved with the inexorable precision of dominoes, falling in a pattern Evelyn had designed 6 months earlier, each consequence triggering the next in a cascade that left no room for mercy or second chances. David sat in his office on Monday morning, staring at the bankruptcy notice that had arrived via courier at dawn. The legal document's language clinical and devastating in its thoroughness. 27 of his 31 clients had terminated their contracts by email overnight, each message eerily similar in its corporate politeness and absolute finality. Morrison Marketing Associates had generated $3.2 million annually, but the forensic audit Evelyn's attorneys had attached to the divorce filing revealed a truth David had never wanted to examine. His success existed entirely within the ecosystem his wife had constructed around him. The advertising executive who'd given him his first major contract was Technova's former communications director. The tech startup that had made him seem cutting edge was a subsidiary of Evelyn's conglomerate. The venture capital firm that had referred him premium clients managed Technova's investment portfolio. His phone buzzed constantly with messages he couldn't bear to read. Former clients expressing concern about recent developments, business partners suggesting they reevaluate their arrangement, and one particularly devastating email from his largest account explaining that association with individuals who demonstrate poor judgment in personal matters reflects poorly on our brand values. The corporate language was diplomatic, but the message was clear. David Morrison had become radioactive in the industry overnight. Natasha Green's situation had deteriorated even faster, her brand's carefully constructed facade collapsing like a building whose foundation had been removed. The bankruptcy filing became public Monday afternoon, revealing 8 years of financial mismanagement hidden behind Instagram glamour and influencer marketing. Without Technova's smart fabric technology, her upcoming fashion line was just expensive clothing in an oversaturated market. Without Technova's manufacturing partnerships, her production costs tripled overnight. Without Technova's distribution network, her international expansion evaporated like morning fog. Her investors had filed a class action lawsuit by Tuesday, alleging fraud and misrepresentation, armed with emails showing Natasha had known about her company's financial instability while soliciting additional funding. The irony was suffocating. She'd pursued David partially for his perceived connections to success, never suspecting that his wife controlled the very infrastructure her brand desperately needed, and her calculated affair had destroyed the only relationship that could have saved her empire. Margaret Morrison discovered that assault charges, even against family members, carried serious consequences when the victim possessed unlimited legal resources and video evidence from 3 camera angles. The defamation lawsuit arrived Tuesday morning, accompanied by security footage so clear that Margaret's attorney had recommended an immediate settlement. But Evelyn's legal team had made their position explicit. No settlement, full trial, public record. The social media explosion had been instantaneous and merciless. Video clips from the banquet had gone viral within hours. David's condescending speech, the military escort's arrival, Commander Patterson's deference to Evelyn, and the moment David's face registered his catastrophic mistake. The internet had performed its usual brutal analysis, out-digging up every dismissive comment David had made about his wife who likes computers in podcast interviews, every Instagram post where Natasha had subtly mocked traditional housewives, every instance where Margaret had publicly criticized Evelyn's fashion choices. Wednesday afternoon, David stood outside the offices of Chen and Morrison Legal Trust, the family law firm Evelyn had established years ago under her maiden name, though he'd never connected the dots. Her attorney, Catherine Walsh, laid out the divorce terms with the efficiency of someone who'd litigated against heads of state. David would receive exactly what he'd brought into the marriage 12 years ago, adjusted for inflation, approximately $47,000. The house, the cars, the investment accounts, the art collection, all purchased with funds originating from Mrs. Morrison's corporate distributions, Catherine explained, sliding documents across the polished conference table. Mr. Morrison, you've been living a lifestyle funded entirely by the woman you publicly humiliated. The prenuptial agreement you signed, and apparently never read, is quite clear about asset division in cases of proven adultery. David's hands shook as he flipped through the financial forensics, seeing his entire adult life reduced to spreadsheets that proved he'd contributed almost nothing to the wealth he'd assumed was his. The beach house in the Hamptons, Evelyn's money. The luxury vehicles, Evelyn's money. The country club membership Margaret had used to feel superior, Evelyn's money. And even his office lease had been guaranteed by instruments backed by Technova's corporate credit. There's more, Catherine continued, her tone suggesting this was the part she'd been anticipating. Mrs. Morrison has decided to make a public statement about supporting women in technology. She'll be doing a profile with Forbes, discussing her journey building Technova while married to someone who dismissed her ambitions. She won't mention you by name, David, but given recent events, everyone will know exactly who she's describing. The final blow came Thursday when Evelyn appeared on the cover of Forbes, her face finally revealed to an industry that had spent years speculating about the mysterious CEO. The article was masterful in its restraint. She never mentioned David directly, but her quotes about building success in silence while being told you're incapable and the cost of dismissing your partner's potential resonated across social media like thunder. Friday afternoon, David sat in his emptying office as movers removed furniture that had never belonged to him, his phone displaying a final message from Evelyn. I never needed you to believe in me, David. I just needed you to stop actively diminishing me. You chose differently, and consequences aren't punishment. They're just the natural result of choices. I hope your next partner receives the respect you never gave me. The military Maybachs had long since departed, but their arrival had served its purpose, demonstrating that real power doesn't announce itself until the precise moment it becomes undeniable. Evelyn had returned to running Technova. Her brief interruption from corporate empire building resolved with the surgical efficiency she applied to everything. She'd built her success in silence, protected it with strategy, and when betrayal came, she'd allowed natural consequences to do what revenge never could, reveal the truth about who had always held the power. David Morrison had wanted a divorce from an ordinary housewife. Instead, he'd divorced a titan who'd been carrying him for 12 years, and gravity, finally released, had pulled him exactly where his choices had always been leading, toward the bankruptcy and irrelevance he'd earned through years of dismissal, disrespect, and the fatal arrogance of never questioning what he didn't understand.